The audience stood and applauded. Ed McMahon looked on in shock. And Johnny Carson refused to stand up for Clint Eastwood. No one knew why. It was March 1976. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. Tuesday night. The show was running smoothly. Johnny had just finished a monologue about the presidential primaries. The audience was warm and engaged, and the guest list was stellar. Tonight's main guest was Clint Eastwood. Hollywood royalty. The man with no name. Dirty Harry. One of the biggest movie stars in the world at the height of his fame. His latest film had just opened to massive box office numbers, and every talk show in America wanted him. But Clint had chosen The Tonight Show. He always chose Johnny when he did television. They had history, years of interviews, mutual respect, the kind of easy rapport that made for great television. The band played the opening fanfare. Ed McMahon's voice boomed across the studio. And now, please welcome Clint Eastwood. The audience erupted. 300 people on their feet, applauding wildly. The curtain parted and Clint Eastwood stepped onto the stage in his signature style, confident, relaxed, that iconic slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He waved to the audience, nodded to Doc Severinsen and the band. And then he walked toward Johnny's desk. This was the moment that always happened on The Tonight Show. The moment every host did instinctively, every single time, without thinking. When a major star walked onto the stage, the host stood up from behind the desk to greet them. Shake hands. Maybe a quick hug. A moment of welcome before they sat down for the interview. Johnny Carson had done this thousands of times. For hundreds of guests. It was automatic. Muscle memory. Part of the rhythm of the show. But tonight, as Clint Eastwood approached the desk with his hand extended for the traditional greeting, Johnny Carson remained seated. His hands stayed flat on the desktop. His body didn't move. He looked up at Clint with an expression that was impossible to read, not hostile, not friendly, just still. The audience's applause faltered. People kept clapping, but you could hear the confusion spreading through the studio like a wave. Something was wrong. Something was different. Ed McMahon, sitting in his chair to Johnny's right, froze mid-clap. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Johnny, then at Clint, then back at Johnny. His face showed pure bewilderment. Clint stopped walking. He was 3 feet from the desk, his hands still extended, his smile fading into something closer to surprise. For a man famous for his stoic composure, the confusion on his face was striking. The audience stood applauding while Ed McMahon watched in shock as Johnny Carson refused to stand for Clint Eastwood, and no one knew why. The control room erupted into chaos. "What's happening?" Director Bobby Quinn was shouting into his headset. "Why isn't Johnny standing? Is this a bit? Did I miss something in rehearsal?" Producer Fred DeCordova stood behind Bobby, hands gripping the back of the director's chair, staring at the monitors. "There was nothing in rehearsal. This isn't planned." Something's wrong. On the studio floor, the audience's applause had died completely now. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. 300 people watching Johnny Carson and Clint Eastwood locked in this strange, frozen tableau, one standing with his hand extended, one sitting with his hands on the desk, either moving, either speaking. "Johnny?" Clint said finally, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp. "You okay?" Johnny didn't answer immediately. He looked at Clint's extended hand. Then at Clint's face. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but perfectly clear in the studio's silence. "Sit down, Clint." Not cold. Not angry. Just flat. Emotionless. The voice of someone who had made a decision and wasn't going to be moved from it. Clint's hand lowered slowly. He glanced at Ed, who looked as confused as everyone else. Then he walked to the guest chair and sat down, his body language showing he had no idea what was happening. The audience rustled with uncertainty. Doc Severinsen and the band members exchanged looks. Every camera operator was wondering if they should cut away, but no one in the control room was giving directions because no one knew what to do. Johnny Carson sat behind his desk, looking at Clint Eastwood, and said 6 words that would define one of the most talked about moments in Tonight Show history. "We need to talk about your father." Carson stopped mid-greeting. The entire studio froze. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 6 months earlier. September 1975. Johnny Carson wasn't on The Tonight Show that night. It was one of his scheduled weeks off, with guest host Joey Bishop filling in. Johnny was home in Malibu, enjoying a rare quiet evening, when his private phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Mr. Carson? This is Ruth Eastwood, Clint Eastwood's mother. I'm sorry to call you at home, but I didn't know who else to reach." Johnny sat up immediately. He'd met Ruth Eastwood several times over the years, a kind woman, salt of the earth, the type who still got nervous around Hollywood people even though her son was a megastar. "Mrs. Eastwood, what's wrong?" "It's Clinton Sr.," she said, using Clint's father's full name. He had a stroke 3 days ago. He's in the hospital." "It's bad, Mr. Carson. Real bad. The doctors say we should prepare." Johnny's heart sank. He'd met Clinton Eastwood Sr. once, briefly, at a Tonight Show taping years ago. A quiet man, former steelworker, proud of his son but uncomfortable with the fame. He'd shaken Johnny's hand and said simply, "Thank you for being kind to my boy." "I'm so sorry," Johnny said. "Is there anything I can do?" Ruth hesitated. "That's why I'm calling. Clinton, he's been asking for Clint. For 2 days now. But Clint is in the Philippines. Shooting a movie. Some more film in the jungle. We can't reach him. The production company says they're in a remote location, they'll get a message to him. But that was yesterday and we still haven't heard anything and Clinton keeps asking." Her voice broke. "He keeps asking where his son is." Johnny closed his eyes. "What do you need from me?" "The production company is called Malpaso. It's Clint's own company. They should be able to reach him immediately, but they keep saying it's complicated. They're trying. There are communication issues with the Philippines." She was crying now. "Mr. Carson, you know people. You know how to get things done in this industry. Can you help me find my son before his father dies?" "Give me 2 hours," Johnny said. He made 8 phone calls. To studio heads, to international operators, to military contacts who could reach remote film locations. He called in favors, pulled strings, used every connection he'd built in 3 decades in show business. 90 minutes later, his phone rang. It was Clint. "Johnny?" Clint's voice was tight with panic. "I just got your message. They patched me through on a military radio. What's happening? Is it my dad? He had a stroke, Clint. He's asking for you. Your mother doesn't think there's much time. I'm on a film set in the middle of nowhere. The nearest airfield is 3 hours away by jeep. I don't know if I can. There's a military helicopter being diverted to your location." Johnny interrupted. "It'll be there in 45 minutes. They'll take you to Manila. There's a commercial flight from Manila to Los Angeles leaving in 6 hours. I have you booked in first class. A car will meet you at LAX and take you straight to the hospital." Silence on the other end. "Then, you did all that? In an hour?" "Your mother called me," Johnny said simply. "She needed help. Now go. Get to that helicopter." "Johnny, I don't know how to." "Thank Clint. Just go be with your father. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Clint made it to Los Angeles in 18 hours. He walked into his father's hospital room at 3 in the morning, and Clinton Eastwood Sr. opened his eyes, saw his son, smiled, and said, "There you are." He died 6 hours later, holding Clint's hand. At the funeral 3 days later, Ruth Eastwood told Clint what Johnny had done. How he'd moved heaven and earth to get her son home in time. Clint was overwhelmed with gratitude. He tried calling Johnny to thank him, but Johnny was traveling. He sent a telegram instead, pouring out his thanks, promising he would find a way to repay this incredible kindness. Johnny never responded. Weeks passed. Clint tried calling again. No answer. He tried reaching out through NBC. The network said Johnny had received the message but hadn't commented. Months went by. Clint couldn't understand why Johnny wouldn't accept his thanks, wouldn't even acknowledge what he'd done. And then, in March 1976, Clint was scheduled to appear on The Tonight Show to promote his new film. He thought finally he could thank Johnny properly. On television, in front of millions of people, he would tell the story of what Johnny Carson had done for him. How he'd gotten him home to say goodbye to his father. He had planned it all out. He'd walk onto the stage, shake Johnny's hand, and before they even sat down, he'd turn to the audience and tell them about the kindness Johnny had shown. About the calls Johnny had made, the strings he'd pulled, the father-son goodbye that wouldn't have happened without him. It was going to be beautiful. A moment of genuine gratitude on live television. America would see Johnny Carson not as a comedian or a host, but as a man who helped a stranger in crisis. But Clint hadn't told Johnny he was planning this. He wanted it to be a surprise. A public thank you that Johnny couldn't refuse or deflect. What Clint didn't know, what no one in the audience knew, what even Ed McMahon didn't know, was that Johnny Carson had one unbreakable rule about his private kindnesses: they stayed private. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Now, sitting on the Tonight Show stage with Clint Eastwood looking confused and hurt in the guest chair, with 300 audience members holding their breath, with millions watching at home wondering what was happening, Johnny Carson pulled open his desk drawer. He took out a piece of paper. A telegram. The one Clint had sent months ago, thanking him for helping get him home to his father. Johnny placed it on the desk between them. "You were going to tell them," Johnny said quietly, his eyes locked on Clint's. "You were going to walk out here, shake my hand, and tell this whole studio, tell America, what I did to help you get to your father. Weren't you?" Clint's face showed understanding dawning. "And shame. I wanted to thank you. Publicly. You deserve." "I don't," Johnny interrupted, his voice sharp but not cruel. "I don't deserve public thanks for doing what any decent person would do. Your mother called me in distress. Her husband was dying. Her son couldn't get home. I made some phone calls. That's it. That's not heroism. That's not something that should be turned into a television moment." The studio was absolutely silent. You could hear the soft hum of the cameras, the creak of someone shifting weight in the audience seats. Nothing else. "But you," Clint started. "Do you know why I didn't return your calls?" Johnny asked. "Why I didn't respond to your telegram?" Clint shook his head. "Because the moment I accepted your thanks, it stopped being about your father and became about me. It became a transaction. You owe Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson is such a great guy. Look what Johnny Carson did." He picked up the telegram. "This piece of paper right here, this makes what I did into currency. And I won't have that." Ed McMahon had tears in his eyes. The audience was transfixed. Clint Eastwood, tough, stoic Clint Eastwood, looked like he'd been struck. "I'm sorry," Clint said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't understand. I just wanted." "I know what you wanted," Johnny said, his voice gentler now. "But some things aren't for cameras, Clint. You got to say goodbye to your father. That's what mattered. That's the only thing that mattered." Johnny picked up the telegram, folded it carefully, and handed it across the desk to Clint. "Keep this. Remember that night. But don't ever try to repay it. You don't owe me anything." Clint took the telegram with shaking hands. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," Johnny replied. Then he stood up. Finally. And extended his hand. Clint stood too. They shook hands. The audience erupted, not in entertainment applause, but in reverent understanding. They just witnessed something real. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The interview that followed was quiet, honest, personal. They talked about fathers and sons and what it means to say goodbye. It was the most watched Tonight Show episode of 1976. Johnny kept the rule forever. Private kindness stays private. Clint never spoke publicly about that night until after Johnny died in 2005. At Johnny's funeral, Clint Eastwood gave the eulogy. He carried that telegram with him. He still does.